All right, ladies and gents, here you are. We're at one of the highlights of the year. This is going to be dealing with what is considered one of the biggies in algebra. It's called the quadratic formula, and that's what we're going to tackle in this section. And the quadratic formula is actually derived from completing the square, so we're going to review that. So let's take a look at this one here with x squared plus 8x plus 3. Our first step, of course, is to move the 3 to the other side. We get x squared plus 8x. There's nothing in front of the x squared, so you can put plus box. Your square equals negative 3 plus square. And I take half the 8, that's called 4. I like to write that below once again. Square it is 16, and if I had 16 on one side and there's nothing out in front or an unwritten 1, times 16, 16 on the other side. Put a little x in front, put it in parentheses and square it. That is what this whole thing right here factors to. And that equals 16 minus 3 is 13. So then we take the square root of both sides. The only way to get rid of the square, plus or minus on this side. So I get x plus 4 now is equal to plus or minus 13. And you know if you do it, you got x plus 4 equals 13. And x plus 4 equals negative square root of 13. My bad, it's square root of 13. Let's fix this. So negative square root of 13. And you're going to subtract 4 from both sides in both cases. So minus 4, minus 4. And you'll end up with two answers. You'll get x equals negative 4 plus the square root of 13. And x equals negative 4 minus the square root of 13. And they ask you what type do these numbers actually represent. Well, if you take a look at it, we got square roots of 13, which means those are not perfect squares, which means we're talking irrational numbers. So they are irrational. And sometimes our answers will get that way. Now, you can do that with completing the square, but we're going to talk about something you can't do this way. Completing the square will get us our answer, but there's another system we're going to talk about. All right, so from the previous quadratic, it says identify the following. In part A, this is an exercise 2. What's the A, B, and C? Well, you guys got to remember it's called ax squared plus bx plus c, and we did all this way back when to figure out the different pieces for the AC method. So if I've got an x squared plus 8x plus 3 equals 0, it's the quadratic form, you can easily pick up then the a is the unwritten 1 here, the b will be the positive 8, and the c will be the positive 3. So a is 1, b is equal to 8, c is equal to 3. So now it says substitute into this formula up here. So you need to write x equals the negative. Now go look at your b. My b is an 8, so take the negative of 8, plus or minus, square root, b squared, so that's 8 squared, minus 4 times a is 1, times c, which I forgot to write down 3 down here, is a 3. All divided by 2 times a is 1. So x is equal to negative 8. Start cleaning this up. Plus or minus. Square root of 8 squared is 64. And if you multiply on minus 4 times 1 times 3, you get a minus 12. All over 2. So x equals negative 8. Plus or minus. 64 minus that is 52. All over 2. And here's where you got to start breaking it up. So, square root of 52. Cut it in half, 26. Does 25 go into it? No, does not. Does the next one with your perfect square, 16, go into it? Nope, it does not. That would be 48, close. Does 9 go into 52? Nope. Does 4? Nope. So I really get nothing out of it, because really it's just 2 times 13. So I can't break up 64 out of it, or 52. So, my final answer, you're fine to leave it that way if you want. If you want to break it up and put -8 over 2 and tell me like a -4 plus or minus and then radical 52 over 2, that's fine, but I'm okay leaving it this way because we can't break it up any further. Alright, so now we're going to consider this quadratic equation right here. And first we're going to solve it by factoring. So once again, pick out your A, your B, and your C. So A is equal to 2, B is equal to -9, and C is equal to 4. And we're going to do the X box on this, the AC method. So A times C would be 8, 2 times 4 here. And -9 for my B. They got to get a negative total and it's positive, so they both got to be negative. And if you do your list, it's 8 and 1. 8 times 1 gives you 8, and they add up to -9. Okay? So then we take the 2x squared. We bring in this pair here, so minus 8x minus 1x plus 4 equals 0. You factor out a 2, so I'm going to on the first pair right here. So you have a 2 out in front and an x. We need a 2 and an x. So 2 and an x come out. You are left with just an x minus 4. On the second part here, I need to take out the negative sign, and nothing else can come out, so a -1. So divide them both by a -1. You're left with an x minus 4 equaling 0. So I get a, let's see here, a 2x minus 1 is one pair. The other pair is x minus 4 equal to 0. Tee it up. That's how we do it with factoring. So 2x minus 1 equals 0. Add 1, add 1. 2x equals 1. Divide by 2, divide by 2. So there's your one answer, 1/2. The other side, x minus 4 equals 0. So add 4, and x is equal to 4. So I get two rational answers here. Well, we're going to move on and do the quadratic formula. So we already know that that's x equals -b, so I need the negative of a -9. Notice that double negative there. Plus or minus the square root of, now be very careful here, make sure your -9 goes in parentheses when you're squaring it. If you do it on the calculator, if you don't remember that, and you do -9, it will only square the 9, it'll tell you a negative answer. We know a negative times negative is positive. So then minus 4 times a is 2, times c is 4, and the whole thing is divided by 2 times a is 2. So as I go through this process here, the -9 is positive 9, plus or minus the square root of 81, and we've got what? Minus a 32, all divided by 4. So x is equal to 9 plus or minus square root of 49 divided by 4. So we basically have x is equal to 9 plus square root of 49 is 7 divided by 4. And the other one is x is equal to 9 minus square root of 49, which is 7 divided by 4. So in this case, you get 16 divided by 4. So one answer is 4. Bingo, matches up. And the other one, x is equal to 2 divided by 4, which of course reduces to 1/2, and that one matches up. So you can see it either way. A lot of kids love the quadratic formula because you are given that on the final exam. On your reference table, you don't have to memorize it over completing the square, but hang in there because the state loves to test you on completing the square also. So that's usually a question that forces you to completing the square, so we need to know both. All right, moving on to the last. All right, so on the last question, I really tell you about this. The quadratic formula comes in because there are going to be cases you try to factor it, you can't factor. So you've got two choices, completing the square or you got the quadratic formula. And like I said, a lot of kids love quadratic formula. So under number 4, they want us to get us the simplest radical form, which means no decimals at the end. Leave it in radical form if there's a radical. So let's pick this one out here. In part A is equal to 1. B is equal to 6, and C is equal to a negative 9. So if I'm doing my quadratic formula, x equals the negative of b is 6. So make that look more like a 6. There we go. Plus or minus square root of 6 squared minus 4 times a is 1 times c is 9, negative 9. All divided by 2 times a is 1. So then x equals negative 6 plus or minus square root of 36. And in this case, negative 4 times 1 times a negative 9 is another 36. So that's plus 36. All divided by 2. So x is equal to negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 72 divided by 2. Now, once again, let's talk about that square root of 72 piece. You just had two 36s, right? So this really is x is equal to a negative 6 plus or minus. Now think about it. If I break this thing down, it's square root of 36 times 2, isn't it? So that's 6 radical 2 divided by 2. Now you can bust this up and say, hey, it's negative 6 plus square root of 6 over 2 and negative 6 minus it and all that. I've got a little system I like to call the V. Remember, both of these are basically over 2. Each one's individually over 2. So I do this thing called the V thing. 2 goes into everything there. So my final answer here for a shortcut here, Mr. Payne's not going to like that I did this, but that's okay. Negative 3, because half of negative 6 is that, plus or minus 3 radical 2. And of course the bottom was, I divide them all by 2. And that's my final answer here. You get them all like that. And you may write it that way. Or, once again, separate it and do them both. That's fine. All right, I'm going to pause the video here for a moment. I want you to try B on your own. All right, and give it a shot, and then I'll show you the answers and see where it's at. Hope you paused it. There's my A, B, and C. If you didn't, pause the video, give it a shot. All right, so I plugged it in the formula. You can see my work right here. Doing the numbers, doing the math. I end up with square root of 28. Remember, 28 is 4 times 7, the square root of 4. This whole thing busts up into this. 2 radical 7. And then I'm going to do my little V thing again. You can reduce it at the end. All 3 of these right here are divisible by 2. So I can get 2 in all 3 of them. So I'm going to take a 2 out of everybody here. And x will end up being negative 2. So that's half of that, plus or minus. The 2's gone there, radical 7. And the whole thing over half of 6 is 3. And that is fine to leave your answer that way. Okay? So that's the quadratic formula. The nice thing is you do not need to memorize it, although if you want to have some fun, Google it. There's a quadratic formula song out there you can follow on video on YouTube. But you don't need to memorize it, so it's given to you. You just need to know how to use it. And at last resort, that takes care of you. Having problems, you guys having problems with factoring, if they don't tell you how to solve it, you can use the quadratic formula for solving every single kind. So, great tool to have in your pocket. Ultimate, one of the biggest highlights of the entire year. Hope you enjoyed. We'll see you in class.